God exists. That's an
Yeah,
unfalsifiable claim.
exactly. And that's a major
But
problem
it
with
does,
religion.
but
You
that
can't
just doesn't
test it.
follow.
It's
That
unprovable.
doesn't matter. It
Right.
might be unprovable,
So
but it
you
ain't
can't give it
false.
the value of true or false. Like it's an unfalsifiable statement, which would make it a conspiracy theory.
Well, first off, I don't know that maybe that makes sense.
Trump does really well with affluent voters, not educated voters, but wealthy voters, right? Like the Republican Party traditionally carries those voters. His largest donors were wealthy. He makes up in terms of wealthy donors, he makes up most of them. So like it's not like poverty created Donald Trump voters, and you would obviously concede of the 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump, they didn't all just come from eroded nuclear families. So that's a problem that
Well,
one, the nuclear family doesn't fix, and two, you can't say comes from the erosion of the nuclear family. And it is directly tied to fascism.
well, the problem there is it's not simply, oh, that person came from, but they live in a society that has eroded nuclear families. So there, it's not just a one to one from your specific kid or that specific kid grew up in a certain way. Even if you grew up in a nuclear family and you go to school where
That
half
sounds
of the
like
kids are
solely intuitive to me, right? Like, is there a way to falsify that?
to falsify which specific statement.
That society is causing the erosion of the nuclear. I don't even know the point you're trying to get to. Is really the erosion of the nuclear family in society is breeding Trump voters, even if they're in a nuclear family, even if they come from a good nuclear family and were raised well, that the society's erosion of the nuclear family still led them to be a Trump voter. That sounds like an unfalsifiable statement, which makes it
It,
like entirely intuitive or
essentially, what I'm
conspiratorial.
trying to argue is there are certain conditions. Tell me if you agree with this. There are certain conditions that allow for the rise of a figure like Trump better than other circumstances. Would you agree with that?
I mean, that's really broad and vague. I would agree
Certain
with it.
social
Like, I would
circumstances,
agree with it, but I would think we would probably disagree on those conditions.
sure, but
Like, I would
at
think
least so you can
religion, I would think
understand,
religion is a big one of those, and I don't think you would.
sure, and at least we agree conceptually that that's a thing. That's essentially where I'm trying to come from. Is I think that there are conditions that began with the erosion of the family, or at least in part began there, that
Mhm.
allowed for a scenario like we see today. Um, so, for instance, we know that less family stability equals less civic engagement. So you're not even having as many people, if they're not coming from stable homes, likely to vote or volunteer or trust elections or be involved in democracy. And so if you don't have people who actually care about voting and the only who care about these issues, or they feel discouraged, none of these things are ever going to happen, so I'm just not going to vote. The amount of times I've heard people in our age range say they're not even going to vote because both candidates suck or whatever. It's creating an environment where people don't even want to be involved is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, so
Um,
my contention with that specifically is that Trump overwhelmingly carried the religious vote. And we just had a debate where you spewed a bunch of facts to me or statistics to me about how religious people come from two-parent, affluent, wealthy households, educated, all of this, stable households, but they still overwhelmingly fell for the propaganda, fell for the fascism, and voted for the fascists. So again, I don't think that these are things you can like intuitively attribute to the erosion of society, even or erosion of the nuclear family in society, so much so that even when you come from a nuclear family, you still might feel these effects. I think it's clearly the effects of fascism and propaganda which stand to erode democracy. And I don't know if the nuclear family really plays into that at all. And I
yeah,
feel
like I go ahead.
and I was just going to say last thing is I just feel like it's an unfalsifiable statement, which would make it a conspiracy theory.
Well, first off, I don't know that maybe that makes sense. An unfalsifiable statement equals a conspiracy theory. Maybe. I don't know that I would say that. And to be perfectly clear, let's not pretend like a conspiracy theory means that something is false. That's not even true either. So, um, and just because something's unfalsifiable doesn't mean it's false. But
Okay, I disagree
basic,
with all of those statements that you just said. That's an insane bit to just drop. Oh, okay, you don't wait. Hold on. We're not gonna go ahead. I don't want to derail this
what do
debate.
you mean that's an insane bit? Obviously, an unfalsifiable statement doesn't mean that it's false inherently. That doesn't make sense.
you
How would
don't
that
trust
follow?
falsifiability. How do you prove the validity of an unfalsifiable statement?
That's not.
How do you
I'm not
test
talking
the
about proving
validity of
anything.
it?
I'm saying it doesn't make it false.
You
That
can't
just doesn't
test it.
follow.
It's
That
unprovable.
doesn't matter. It
Right.
might be unprovable, but
So
that doesn't
you
make it
can't give it
false.
the value of true or false, right? If you can't prove it to be either. So falsifiability is really important. But we don't have to derail too much, but falsifiability, like, hold on, like, do you value like the scientific method?
Of course, I value the
Okay,
scientific
well, like
method.
falsifiability is like key to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about science, so I don't know what that really has to do.
Well, the scientific method is just a means to come to like provisional truth. And it's like falsifiability is like
Yeah,
key.
let's take a claim, for instance, God exists. That's an
Yeah,
unfalsifiable claim.
exactly. And that's a major
But
problem
it
with
does
religion.
but that cannot ever mean logically, therefore, because it's an unfalsifiable claim, therefore God does not exist. That would be fallacious. That doesn't make sense. You
It
cannot
means
say
it
he
means it's
doesn't.
illogical to believe in.
The best you can do is say, um,
We are getting away from the
yes,
topic. Maybe
yes,
this would
yes,
make a good debate to do.
yes,
I would
sure.
think that would make it illogical to believe in because there's no way to validate it. And if you're believing things that are inherently unvalidatable isn't a word, but that you can't validate, I think it's illogical. But
Yeah, but that would be to pretend that evidence can't be convincing. For instance, I might have, let's just make up a number, 25 amazing pieces of evidence
right.
for in favor of the premise that God exists, and then it would be reasonable because I have reasons. I literally have reasons, so it's reasonable to believe, but it's unfalsifiable. Anyways,
Yeah, I totally
kind of where were
disagree.
we on before that
I
derailment?
I mean, my biggest point is that yeah, erosion of the nuclear family. I didn't think you could attribute it to the things of like voters for Donald Trump because he carried the religious vote. Rich people voted for Donald Trump, so people who don't directly suffer from this.
Let me ask you this: do you think a large portion of people voted for Donald Trump because they felt when he went out and said whatever he said that they felt seen, heard, spoken for, like somebody was actually sticking up for them, essentially?
I think the only people who felt that way are bigots, like people who are racist. I think more so, most people fell for the propaganda, especially this time around. I think
Which
maybe
propaganda are you talking about specifically?
I mean, different pieces of propaganda for different coalitions. Some people, I'm sure a lot of the religious voters could have fell for, Democrats want to do third trimester abortions and kill babies after birth. Some people might have fell for Democrats are flying in immigrants to use them as voters, right? Just like the blatant lies he's telling to obviously appeal to different constituencies. And I think again, like I would say propaganda is a large threat to democracy and the powers of propaganda. And I wouldn't attribute that to the erosion of a nuclear family. I would attribute that to like, I mean, a time old trick that people in power have always used against those beneath them.
Sure, I would say I think a lot of people voted, at least in my circles, for instance, talking about the immigrant thing, uh, because of violent criminal immigrants coming in and gangbangers or whatever. And
Exactly.
I
And you
forget
would contribute
the
that to propaganda, right?
well, I would contribute higher crime rates to fatherless homes in ninety
Well, there
percent of
wasn't higher crime rates.
what do you higher crime rates than when?
Well, from when Joe Biden took office to when he left office, crime
Yeah,
rates dropped. So they were
remember I'm talking
dropping.
about the dissolution of the family. I'm not talking about when
I know,
Trump
but
came in office or when
yeah,
Biden
no,
came in
no, no.
office. So I'm
What
talking
I
about something like 80 years in the making, 80 years of stuff is what I'm discussing. And so I'm saying over the 80 last 100 years, 80 years, um, civil society has
I don't even know if
become
that's true because I think
weakened.
the murder rates have been dropping since the 90s. I'm almost positive the violent crime rates have been dropping since the 90s. I think they spiked again during COVID and then they've been dropping again since COVID.